I mean, did you accept that you're a loser?
Yeah.
Or did you think that I'm capable of so much more? Did you
with all these guys, this huge melee, bunch of people in the street, and luckily I didn't get hurt. No one got killed or stabbed, although it got really tense, and I did fine. I stayed up,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't some sort of tough guy, but I'd been in enough fights that, and there's some things that you can do, like not tell people you're going to hit them.
Yeah.
Just,
Catch
those
them
kind
off
of,
guard. Yeah.
But listen, I'd already had one friend get cold cocked at a bar and ended up with permanent motor cortex damage. He still walks with a limp today. So, fights we think, boys will be boys, but you can
dangerous.
be brain damage or someone can pull out a gun or a knife. So after that, I went home to where I was squatting. I was squatting in a empty home that summer in Santa Barbara. And I realized I'm officially a loser, right? I'm 19 years old. Girlfriend and I are split up. I screwed up my first opportunity, or the opportunity to get a college education. I'd gotten straight C's and D's my first year, if I even got that. I've already been to youth detention once, but now I'm 19. I'm delivering bagels. I don't like the guy who owns the bagel shop. I have a bad attitude. I'm officially a loser.
Did you accept that you're a loser?
Yeah.
Or did you think that I'm capable of so much more, I just need a break? What was your mindset?
I think I was in a bitterness about what had happened in my family life. I think I was angry, to be honest, that I wasn't good at anything. I was like, I'm not good at skateboarding. Victim mentality. And I knew I had a strong drive and a capacity to do things, but I kept thinking, who's going to be the great teacher that's going to get me excited about a subject? And I actually wrote a 2-page letter to my mom. I still have it, where I said, this is it. I'm turning it around. I don't care if the teachers are good. I'm going to just do the work. And blah, 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 and a bunch of stuff. Did
anybody tell you were intelligent? Or because right now people, if they think of you now, you're like one of the most intelligent people they know of. They listen to you. You're just like, you could throw any topic out and you have some amazing answer. Did you feel intelligent then? Did anybody tell you you're smart?
No. When
did you figure that out?
I had some carryover from when I was younger that I have a really good memory. And then when I'm excited about something, I really throw myself into it. But no one told me I was dumb, but I didn't have anything to show for my time. All I had was this story about how things went wrong. And that was really the switch in my head. It was when you're young, people can say, oh my God, you poor kid, all this stuff happened. And, I'm not getting into the details of my home life early on. It was, from about 13 to 18, it was super dark. There were times when I go home and I was just completely alone. And, and I lived in a community where that wasn't common, so it was easy to hide. But I had friends whose parents, I'd go to their house and eat dinner with them. Or my mom was doing the best she could, and I want to be clear, her idea of family was nuclear family, 2 parents, the kids. And when that fell apart, I think she just went into a tailspin.
Yeah. Gave up hope a little bit.
Yeah. It was just a total tailspin. So I think what happened that summer after that, July 4th, 1994, it's sort of funny because, not that I worry if people believe the stories or not, but recently there are a couple very well-known musicians and people that were actually at that became well-known people in the world who talked about it on other podcasts, and I had a reputation after my freshman year being the guy that was fun to have at a party because it was going to be a fight, or we'd get mattresses up on the roof and set them on fire and then jump onto them. I was just
the
wild.
Crazy guy.
Yeah, I was wild. Before there was Jackass, there was everybody that was doing that anyway. Crazy stuff. Yeah. So, that letter was really about enough is enough. And actually looking back, I realized just now, that was me parenting myself. I'm I'm going to be a good parent to myself because no one else can control me.
Right.
My parents might have tried.
So the letter was to your mom, but it was really to you.
Yeah. It was hey, listen, whatever has gone on in your past, it's going to mean nothing to the world unless you clean your act up now. So I moved home and I went to Foothill College, which was a community college. And when you move home to community college, you're with all the kids that didn't leave.
Yeah.
You're with the kids in high school that didn't leave. and most of them it's a commuter school. No one lives there. And I would say most of them at that time weren't staying. They were like taking a couple classes and then leaving. But I will say this, because I think people hear I'm at Stanford, I'm a tenured Stanford professor. I'm a huge fan of the community college system. I mean, it's extremely inexpensive compared to university.
Because I think some people feel like that's a failure, and some, they didn't get into the 4-year school, and now they got to go to community college,
can't afford it,
or they can't afford it, or maybe their grades weren't good enough, and so they need to go get an associate's or something. But you're there with 40-year-old moms, and it's like some kids feel like it's a failed experiment, and they have to settle for community college.
Yeah. Well, I think also I'd spent so little time in high school that I didn't have the basics. So I got a great education at Foothill for 2 quarters. It was on the quarter system. I took art history, I took some psychology, some biology, and I'm like, that's it. Like, I can do this. I can, I started working really hard, memorizing my textbooks, working really hard. I go to the gym. I always reacted well to the weights. My body could grow quickly. I was still running, lifting, and I started studying for real. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. If I study, it's kind of interesting. Everyone thinks school's so hard. They tell you what you need to know.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the tests are hard or the lectures are difficult to parse, but they have office hours where if you go, they'll explain what they meant if you didn't understand. I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that in life.
Right.
It's time consuming, but it doesn't get any easier than that. The challenge can be balancing, too many classes. So for sure. And some classes are downright hard.
Yeah.
But I decided this is it. So I quickly became a straight A student at the community college. And then I decided to go back to Santa Barbara because I'd taken a leave of absence. So they let me back in, even though I wasn't allowed within 200 yards of some of the classrooms. I had to kind of say, can I come into just this classroom?
Yeah.
And I was a mess. And people reacted very strangely. They thought, who's this guy now? He left. He was this kind of like wild one, I mean, someone sent me some pictures from my time in Santa Barbara recently, and I think the one, like, I always had a shaved head back then, and I had like a can of WD-40 and it was like blowing like flames.
Yeah,
we were just wild. It was like, where's the activity? And I come back and I live in a studio apartment by myself, and no joke, it was sit down, set the timer. I'm going to study. I allow myself to listen to Rancid, still my favorite band by a long shot, or Bob Dylan. And I wouldn't even let myself get up to use the bathroom unless that timer buzzed.
And how long was the timer?
Usually 2 hours at a time, which sucks if you're drinking coffee.
And that was studying?
Studying. So I would do 4 2-hour blocks and just go.
8 hours a day?
At least 8 hours a day. I'd allow myself to lift, allow myself to run, and to eat, of course.
Who paid for the apartment?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was very fortunate that I got some support from my dad, who at that point was kind of like, listen, it's do or die for you. And I should have mentioned this earlier, as an academic, I thought, like there was a part of me back then where I was like, F you, like where were you when I needed you, where were you kind of thing. And he and I have since worked out our stuff. We're close. But, he was like, listen, you have a great opportunity with the public education system. I actually said, I want to go to Whitman. I want to become a journalist. And it's this private school up in Walla Walla, Washington. I'm going to be a journalist. And he looked at the tab, like how much it was going to cost. He goes, how are you going to pay for it?
Yeah.
And so I said, would you pay for it? He goes, no. And that actually was the right thing for him to do. He's like, I want you to go to a big school, big place with public education. My taxes have been paying for this, and go. So I got some help from him, and I worked.
So you humbled yourself enough to accept his help.
That's
because some kids would have said, no, I don't want anything to do with you. Fuck you.
Right. And he was an academic, and I thought at one point I was like, I'm not going to be an academic because you are. That's what you want. And I realized this is going to be self-defeating. Cut off your nose to spite your face kind of thing. So I also earned some income working at a supplement store. It's kind of funny, near a gym, because I could study when people weren't in there. So, and I got free gym membership.
Nice.
So I was able to support part of my requirements, my life expenses. And I decided I don't care who the teacher is or how much they annoy me. I'm going to be in the front row, and I'm going to ace these classes. And so I became kind of a beast.
Academic beast.
Academic beast. It was like I just put everything I had into getting the top score. My girlfriend back then, and we're still in touch. She's happily married, and we talk every once in a while. She's like, I created a monster, because she was much more studious than I was.
Oh,
and she had grown up in a home where she raised horses, and as you know, probably people who raise horses like have to do hard work, shovel manure.
Chores.
Horses get colic. Like it's hard work. Like she was a physically hard worker and worked hard. And her dad only had a 7th grade education and made something of himself coming to this country. So we started seeing each other again, which was good. But it was all about getting my life in order at that point. And at one point I met a guy, his name was Harry Carlisle, and he was an ex-Navy guy who was a neuroscientist, believe it or not, a physiologist. He worked on how the body reacts to cold thermogenesis.
Yeah.
And I started working in his lab, and that was it. I was like, now there's a hands-on piece. We're doing experiments, injecting rats and cutting up their brains and and I was like, man, this is really good. And it just, it built on itself.
Yeah.
I would still go out
some momentum.
Get some momentum. And he was the one who said, you're pretty good at this. You should go to graduate school. They pay you in the sciences to go to graduate school. And so I applied to Berkeley and Princeton. Don't ask me why. But I did. I eventually graduated with honors, and took neuroanatomy, which was a hard course. Did well in that.
Were you seeking out the hardest courses, or just courses that interested you?
Courses that interest me, especially the courses
like you liked the challenge of part of this. Like
Yeah.
you said, you wanted the front row, highest grade. Maybe those courses were the most reputation, the most difficult there was. I don't know.
Yeah, like there was a course in neural development, and I got a B+, and it still pisses me off. And the guy that taught it, Ben Reese, was the toughest professor. And I loved it. I was like, man, I love this stuff. So I loved the material, and a lot of those courses were really hard.
Was he a tough professor? Like, was he a beast too, like you?
Oh yeah, he taught us as if we were adults. And so what you find is, and there are data on this, that the professors that crack a lot of jokes, people like, but they don't get as high respect ratings as the difficult professors that are
serious ones.
Yeah, it's like take your students seriously. I think you can still have some fun and stuff, but I made a point to later when I became a professor, I don't swear in class. I keep I keep it light, and we have a conversation and make things relevant, but then we get serious. We're there to learn, right?
Is that part of the covering of the tattoos?
It is.
Just to keep it, I know I've heard you say you don't want to distract from what you're teaching. So is that part of that whole thought process? Is like, I'm not joking around, we're being serious. I'm serious. Look, I'm not, you're not seeing any entertainment on my body or art.
It's not relevant right now.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's really out of respect for the students. My dad, despite us having our differences over the years, he always said, if you show up a little bit overdressed to something, at least it shows that you had enough respect for your hosts. And so in the classroom setting, it's like, I respect them enough to say, hey, listen, my life, my tattoos, what they mean, we could talk about some other time, maybe or maybe not. But like right now, this is about me teaching you. I'm here for them. I'm not in the classroom for me, although I enjoy it. So back then, Harry Carlisle was my favorite professor, and he taught about, depression, schizophrenia, dopamine, thermoregulation, feeding and hunger. He's a really brilliant professor. And then when I got into graduate school, I decided to go to Berkeley at the time. Now, my parents were very happy that I had turned my life around. But, I'll be honest, I hadn't worked out some of the demons. So I get to Berkeley, and very quickly I ran into some trouble in my interpersonal life with my girlfriend. And I, flailed on a statistics exam. And I'm like, And then it wasn't the right fit of a lab for me. I didn't make the right choice.
So you had a bachelor's and you were working on your master's?
I was working on a PhD, but what ended up happening was I ended up leaving Berkeley after a master's and switching to UC Davis. Now, a lot of people at the time, including some folks at Davis, said, what are you doing? You're in the PhD program at Berkeley. Berkeley's better, blah, blah. Another case where the top tier, the higher ranked school isn't always the best situation. Because what happened was I went up to Davis on the recommendation of somebody, a professor at Berkeley, and I checked it out, and I met this woman, Barbara Chapman, and something just felt right. I was like, I like her. I like the work she's doing. And she said, if you want to come to my lab, you could transfer here or start from scratch. She said, I'm going to have 2 kids, so you're going to have the lab kind of to yourself, but I'll teach you what you need to know.
What do you mean you're going to have 2 kids?
She said she was going to have 2 children in the next couple of years. And so she
had
lived
it planned already.
And she lived in San Francisco, and that was a 2-hour commute each way. And she said, you're going to have the lab mostly to yourself.
So she knew she's going to be missing a lot of time.
Yeah. And I thought, perfect. Because for me, and this is what I ended up doing, I ended up moving up to Davis. So for anyone listening, if you think, oh, why would you ever give up a Berkeley degree for a Davis degree? Well, if the right person to work with is a Davis, if it hits that chord, that's the place to go. So I went to her lab and put tinfoil on the little window. At 5 o'clock, I'd lock the door, crank ranted so loud, and just did experiments nonstop for 4 years. Nonstop. In fact, I was supposed to take my qualifying exam, and they were like, we're going to kick you out of the program if you don't take the qualifying exam. But I was so busy publishing papers. I was already publishing papers in really good journals. And finally, Barbara came to me and she's like, listen, I'm going to kick you out of the lab. And I was like, no. Like, no, and I loved her so much. And I just was like, no, I loved the life. And she could just see that. I lived on black coffee, Diet Mountain Dew, but it got me caffeinated, cucumbers, ground beef, Metrex protein drinks, and just punk rock music.
Like what were your experiments?
So at that time I was studying neural development, how the brain wires up. Sort of nature nurture type stuff in critical period development. So I was doing experiments on a little carnivore species called a ferret. They're actually a carnivore, not a rodent. They have binocular vision, so I was studying binocular vision.
They're cool animals.
They're real cool animals.
Yeah.
I mean, they're kind of stinky, kind of musty smelling.
Yeah.
I kind of like the smell, but some people don't like it. And they have an interesting visual system because it develops mostly out of the womb. So the way biologists talk about them, they're like a half-baked kitty cat. So a kitty cat gestation before a kitten comes out is about 63 days or so. A ferret is essentially got a pretty complex brain. It's got the bumps, which means it's kind of a bumpy brain, it's a complex brain. They're highly visual, and they have a 42-day gestation. So when those little pups come out, it's like being able to do embryology on an animal ex utero. It's a lot easier. Because
it's not fully developed?
Because it's not still in the mom, and it's not still fully developed.
Okay.
Right. So I also started doing some work on fetal macaque monkeys, which is something I didn't really enjoy, but I was really interested in certain questions that could only be addressed in a non-human primate. And Davis had a primate center, still does. And I'll tell you, I loved doing experiments, and I adored Barbara.
Like what were the what would you do to it?
Yeah, so physically, so what we were doing, I was injecting little tracer dyes into specific areas of the brain, looking at anatomy, discovering new circuitry in the brain that people hadn't seen before. I developed this a toxin labeling technique so that you could do multicolored labeling in the brain to see how pathways, not just to, but away from things. That was something I became known for. And then I also figured out how to introduce genes that from the jellyfish, which glow green fluorescent protein, into ferrets. So I was making green glowing ferrets, but not just to make green glowing ferrets, but so that you could visualize specific neurons in the brain. I was also recording the electrical potentials of neurons in the...
And what would that tell you?
And I was learning a couple of things. First of all, how binocular vision develops, how plastic or malleable binocular vision is depending on experience, something that has direct relevance to human ophthalmology and vision. And then I was also trying to discover the sort of genetics and molecules that allow a brain to wire up so precisely. I mean, if you think about it, it's wild. Sperm meets egg, starts duplicating, you get a bunch of cells, and you end up with a brain.
Yeah.
Wild. And that brain can be modified by experience. Like you have circuits in your brain specifically for bow hunting that others don't have, clearly. But all the wiring that's required for making sure that you breathe, digestion, heart rate, vision, all of that has to come online before you see anything. So we were figuring out some of the chemicals that guide neurons to one place or away from another place. And we had discovered there was a series of molecules that act as what are called repellents. They push neurons out of certain regions. Now, there are two ways to wire up a very detailed map in the brain of connections. One is to say, you go here and guide neurons to a place. The other is to say, don't go here. And what we discovered is that a lot of the brain wiring is by exclusion. You just say, you can't go here, can't go here, go here. By default, they go to a given location. So that's what I did in Barbara's lab, and it went spectacularly well. I loved working for her. Published a lot of papers in a lot of really good journals. And at that point I was like,
Was that like publishing a paper? That's a big deal, right?
Yeah. So publishing a paper is the final step in any project. Project starts with a question, ends with a publication. It's a long process, 2 to 3 year process, typically. Most graduate students will be happy to publish 1, maybe 2 first author papers where they really led the project. And then there are different journals like Science, Nature, Cell. The rejection rates are about 99%. So 1% rejection acceptance rate, 1% acceptance rate.
That's published.
That's published. And then other journals, maybe it's 75, 25 and so on. And I was both lucky and very hardworking, and I hit the, timing right. And by the time I'd finished my PhD, I'd published eight first author papers, including 1 in Science. And that's 1 in Nature. It's exceedingly rare. Yeah. I mean, I'll say that, most scientists would be lucky to publish 1 paper in Nature or Science in their career. And I've, been very lucky to have published, I can't do the math right now. I'd have to go back to my CV, but probably 5 or 6.
Is it a function of quality writing or the experiment itself?
It's usually the discovery. The writing in most scientific papers is pretty fractured and poor, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it's a result of the experiment.
Yeah. So when I finished my PhD, I had really turned my life around. I was like, okay, I did it, right? I was like, okay, I have a path. I know what I want to do. And then I went and did a 5-year postdoc, which is like a residency. So where you're not taking any classes, but you're just doing experiments. I did that at Stanford.
For 5 years?
For 5 years.
So how long have you been in school at this point?
And I left high school when I was 17 because I'm a fall baby. So my birthday's in September. So I was 17, 18. And did 5 years as an undergrad because I took the time at Foothill, 2 years as a master's, 4-year PhD, 5-year postdoc, 5 years as a junior professor, 12 years as a tenured professor.
Holy shit.
So yeah, I've got a lot of time under my belt. And
but this is one. So I got distracted by something when you're talking about the brain and all the. I mean, you mentioned it last night, and this had me thinking. It's like when you think how all that works, I have to take an aside and say, how could that happen in nature is without a creator?
Yeah. So, well, here's the thing. I mean, we know that the programs, meaning genes, DNA, and there's DNA, then there's RNA, and then there's proteins. And proteins are the action end of the game where they say, hey, like grow over here, don't grow over there, become this kind of cell, dopamine cell or a serotonin cell. We know that those mechanisms are incredibly well conserved from mice to humans. Now, certain things happen in the human brain that you don't see in other species, like the elaboration of the parts of the brain that are involved in context and planning, especially. But the memory systems, the ones that control hormones, breathing, heart rate, they're very similar. Not exactly the same, but very similar.
Okay.
When you start to study and understand brain development, as I did, or neuroplasticity, or dopamine, you have to, meaning I don't care if you're an atheist, agnostic, or believer in creator, you have to step back and just go, wow. Now, then of course there's this difference among scientists as to who believes in God, who doesn't. I'll just go on record. I'm very comfortable saying I believe in God. I do. I think there are many things that science can explain. There are certain things science can't explain, but I'll even go a step further, which is that all the elements of science are entirely compatible with the idea of there being a God. And I'm not the first scientist to say this. I mean, Einstein believed in God. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists ever, clearly believed in God. There are many atheist scientists. There are agnostic scientists who are just kind of like unsure, right? And, for me, I'm in absolute awe of biology. It's just incredible that we're sitting here having this conversation. It's with language, that there are little sound waves that you're perceiving and understanding. I mean, and I think the brain represents the apex of incredible in terms of biology. Like the heart is interesting, the immune system is interesting, the liver is interesting, but the brain is unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, think about the number of different ways you can move your body compared to another species. Think about what you did today. think about what I was attempting to do today, right?
Yeah.
Spectacular. Think about technology, these lights, the, Tesla cars, spaceships. I mean,
Yeah.
the internet, I mean, unbelievable. And yet, oh, so real.
Yeah.
So, we could talk a bit about how well, I'll just say this. Secretly, I've always prayed. I grew up in a split religion home. My family's like the UN. We've got people from Guatemala, Denmark, Argentina, New York, like all the different political battles are in my family. Super left, super right, libertarians, lefties to the, it's crazy. Thanksgivings can be difficult.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, I absolutely pray. I absolutely love that the idea, but also what for me is really a deep belief, which is that we can't control everything. We're not in as much control as we think we are. And that the magnificence of biology and the magnificence of nature is, it's impossible for me to conceive how that could come about any other way. It just is. Now, yeah, I think that, full stop.
Who do you pray to?
That's an interesting one because I think God. Yeah. So I absolutely do. I've actually started reading the Bible recently, start to finish. I feel like it's my duty to learn and in some sense compare Old and New Testament. I'm really interested in the stories, but I'm fascinated by the story of us, right? And the story of everything. And so, but yeah, I pray out loud in the morning, sometimes again in the middle of the night if I wake up. And it's only recently that I've been doing this more often.
It's giving you peace?
Oh, my goodness. It's given me so much. It's given me peace. And, this is going to sound weird and probably people are going to be like, what are you talking about? If this, it works. It works. There's a way in which certain things I was grappling with, I just couldn't resolve. I couldn't do it. And it was all internal and I just couldn't do it.
How were you trying to resolve these things? Like have an answer?
Yeah, discipline myself. It wasn't like I was super, undisciplined. Obviously I have a lot of self-discipline, but
yeah.
I always pray, I want to remove my defects of character. I want to, I certainly pray for other people. I mostly, these days I pray for the ability to really harness as much care and love for other people and for myself, something I haven't been that good at in my lifetime, in order to be able to put the best possible work into the world, to really serve. Like I really see myself as serving higher power. Like I'm a conduit.
Right.
And the better I can do that, the better I'm serving. The better I'm serving, the more I feel connected to humanity.
Do you think that with this, I don't know if you've always felt like this. It sounds like it's more of a newer feeling. But
somewhat, although secretly.
Yeah.
Like in Santa Barbara, I'll just say there's this place, Sands Beach, down at the end of the beach, if anyone's ever been there. And I used to run down there once a week. I always did a long run, long for me, run on Sunday, minus a 72-pound rock.
Right.
And I would pray. And I just pray for, be honest with myself, be honest with others.
And that was years ago.
I was 18.
Oh, okay.
19, 20. So, and then, I've seen some hardship along the way. I would just mention that I've had 3 amazing scientific advisors. Harry shot himself 2 weeks after I told him we published a paper in Science. He said, come on down to Santa Barbara. It'd be great to take you out for pizza and celebrate. 2 weeks later, ate a bullet in the bathtub. Barbara died of cancer when she was 50. I'm friends with her daughter. I saw her. She did have those 2 kids. One's a neuroscientist.
Oh, man.
At McGill. And she was like a mom to me. She died. I was speaking at her memorial. And then my postdoc advisor died. He was a pretty impressive guy in his own right. And so at one point I'm thinking like, what's going on? I'm the common denominator. How am I picking these people? But they were amazing. And, I had some friends commit suicide, this kind of thing. And you live long enough, that's going to happen. People are going to go. That's just the reality. But there were times I'm like, it was dark. It was, like, where am I? Why me? And at those moments too, just accepting that there's a plan and it's happening for a reason, and I don't know what it is, and just putting my trust in that has allowed me to grieve those things properly and to really try and, I got the message, I got the download to take the lessons from them and just not waste a single day and to do things that I really felt mattered. So to me, it's always been linked
right
to, sort of forces greater than me, certainly.
Does it feel like, when hearing all this, does it feel like once you've taken like a more, I don't know, intentional turn for being grateful and praying, you're not drinking since 2019, it seems like that's been in tandem with your success.
Absolutely. I always wanted to have a deeper relationship to God. I always wanted that. And I kind of was like, why don't I have that? Well, duh. That's like saying I want to be fit. Why I'm not fit? Well, because you're not running, you're not lifting, you're not doing the things. It was like, and it was a couple of different people that kept showing up in my life and they were doing it. And it was like, well, pray. And, I've learned, and I certainly try and do this, that a lot of prayer is about listening. And a lot of prayer is about you ask for things or listen for things. And then an hour later, 2 days later, you go, wait, like it doesn't happen in the moment necessarily, just like fitness. I don't want to compare fitness. I don't want to trivialize prayer by comparing to fitness, but there's some parallels that are relevant. It's
consistent work.
Yeah, it's consistent work. And then all of a sudden, like things come up and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. That makes so much sense. Now, I think that the success of the podcast, first of all, I'm incredibly grateful for it, incredibly grateful. But in many ways, I'm doing exactly what I was doing when I was that 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid. I'm learning and sharing. So it was always in me. And it always felt like this energy, this thing, like, it's like, how did I end up like this? How come all the other kids like don't have this? And how come sometimes it feels like a little bit of a, not a curse, but kind of a burden? Like, what do I do with this? And the deep satisfaction for me comes from acknowledging this is me. I've always been this way. It's not going to change. And that it's not coming from me, it's coming through me.
Right.
And I just want to do right by it. And I think we talked a little bit.
It's a gift, and you're honoring your gift.
That's right.
Essentially.
Yes. Well,
and I feel like if we're honoring our gifts, we're rewarded.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest rewards recently comes from, we talked a little bit about this on the mountain today. It's like, for me, the sweet spot that I finally get steady glimpses of is being loving, but also realistic. Like you can be so loving that you lose touch with the reality. Too much trust isn't good either. But you don't want to be unloving to yourself and others, because then you look at the world through a cynical lens, and then you're not going to be doing your best work. So for me, it's all about being loving, but realistic. And I think prayer helps me arrive there. It does many, many other things. I also just feel like our time here is limited, and I've been so blessed by people that have come along. I mean, those academic mentors meant everything to me, but so did the academic mentors that I didn't work for directly that helped me along. So did the high school football coach that taught me how to lift. So did Lex Friedman, you, Joe Rogan, right? Rich Roll, people who gave me the opportunity to talk on their podcasts about science, and then eventually, we started our own podcast. So to me, it's this like beautiful ecosystem, and I never ever think of myself as like, okay, like I'm here professing to people. I just love being a part of it. I also, just like when I was a kid, I'm crewed up with a bunch of great people, and it's not all guys. Rhonda Patrick too, who, by the way, folks, people always say, who was first man in on public facing science and health education? Not first man, first woman. It was Rhonda. She was the first. Then came Matt Walker, me, some others, right? So I think the community of podcasters also, I feel like, wow, like this is as great as when I discovered neuroscience. And I actually feel more resonance with podcasters because it's really like of the love. You can't have a podcast that is worth anything in terms of its success or its content unless the person doing it loves that thing.
Right.
Like you can't, it's not journalism. It's not media. I mean, and there's a media component because it's public facing, but it's like you love bow hunting.
Yeah.
You love fitness. You love hammering away every day, right?
Yeah, right.
And so you're basically talking about the things that you would be doing anyway. And so am I, and so is Joe, and so is Lex, and so is Rich,
Right,
so
right.
is Rhonda.
Yeah.
And
We're getting paid for this.
right, exactly.
I do this for free.
Exactly. So if anyone out there wants to do a podcast or social media, what I would say is make sure that what you talk about is something that you really, truly care about. And Rob, my producer, and I were talking about this today, that, I think young people would be wise to figure out at least 3 things that they absolutely love doing. And hopefully one of those things can be your source of income in life. Mm-hmm. Maybe you need an advanced degree to build it up. Maybe you don't. I don't think everyone needs to go to college, but maybe like you want to be a lawyer or a doctor. Yeah. You need the degree.
A bow hunter? No.
The degree is earned out there and on the hunts. Right. So I think that, but if you love those things and then you also want to teach other people and share how much you love it, well, then you should be a podcaster. But you can't, podcasting is not like the career. The career is all the stuff that goes into the podcast.
Right.
So anyway, I feel extremely blessed. I'm completely humbled that students would show up on a Thursday night to listen to that lecture. We do live events and you get, like thousands of people there. Like it's wild. And then I also just turn off any kind of notion that it's like about me, because it's not, it's coming through me. But to me, it just feels like the biggest gift in the world is just learn and share.
People